Welcome to A Seat at the Table, a podcast powered by The Ice House, a place for courageous conversations empowering diversity and community in business. You are part of the conversation and have as much to say as anyone else.
So really excited to have Nuwanthie Samarakone with us this afternoon. Came into my world a little while ago through an introduction, and I've been ever so grateful since then. So Nuwanthie is an experienced global business founder, a company director, a trustee, a business and political commentator, and is passionate about fostering young talent in our communities. So welcome, Nuwanthie.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much.
It's so exciting to have you. We've already had a bit of a pre-chat, a little bit of a debate. So we're all fired up and excited to get going.
We've got an hour.
So the next questions are really to get things going, although I don't think we even need them. But quick fire questions, just to get to know who you are. So first one is, what is your ideal holiday?
It would be on an island, a tropical island. I do love the water, so for me that would just be, a good plus.
Perfection. Same here. Party with 100 or 5?
So this really depends on the day or my mood. 100 if I could get through 100 people through a couple of hours based on my time in my life at the moment, but otherwise 5 for some substance.
Brilliant. When are you most relaxed?
When I'm at the beach and with family.
Water baby.
Yeah,
nice. One thing that you are curious about right now?
If I look at where I'm at right now from a New Zealand perspective, what I'm curious to know and I keep thinking about is where is this country going, and what does this mean for us as entrepreneurs and founders, and how does that kind of interweave with the communities that we talk to and deal with every day?
I feel like we're going to unpack that. Yeah, we're going to unpack that. And if you were to write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
My journey into politics, I think. That was quite an impactful experience for me, and I think that's something that I'd like to share at some stage more openly as well.
Nice. And what gives you a sense of purpose?
Doing what I love, but it's got to be values-based, and anything that I feel like I am genuinely making an impact and I'm taking people along with me on that journey, that whole collective sort of approach, I think is what keeps me grounded.
Do you have a set of personal values?
Yep, I do. Respect is a really big one for me, integrity, and the level of open communication. I think in this world today, we live in a world where it's either a one-way dialogue or it's a dialogue that we're too afraid to have, and I feel like we've just got to be brave enough and be bold enough to actually just say what we're thinking and have some robust conversations and debates about it.
Agreed. I love it.
That's good.
There you go. Take it away, Brian.
I will, because it was such an honour to research about you, and it really was to learn about you, to listen to some of your radio interviews, and to see what you've done. And you are really an impactful leader. So I got very excited and I got totally carried away with all these questions. I'm probably not even going to get through them all. But the first one is, who is Nuwanthie? And tell us a little bit about yourself. What does that bring up for you?
So Nuwanthie, my name actually means knowledge. So much to my horror growing up, thinking that this was the expectation from my mum and my dad. It was just like oh my God, what were you thinking? So it's Sri Lankan originally. I was born in Sri Lanka, raised up in Scotland, up in Stirling as a very young child, and I moved to New Zealand at the age of 14. So for me, I guess in terms of how I describe myself, I always say, look, I'm quite international in that sense of how I see the world and how I see people and how I see communities and how I still do business, I think, as well. So that also keeps me quite grounded in that sense of me and what I'm passionate about, but also making sure that I have people around me that remind me of my journey. And I've got my parents to thank for that, so yeah.
You're moving somewhere at the age of 14 is quite an interesting time of life, to do that.
It was wild.
How did you find that?
Particularly as a girl.
As a girl.
I mean, maybe that's because I
Totally, and I was public schooled in the UK basically all my life. So we moved to New Zealand at 14, and Mum decided to send me to a co-ed school in New Zealand, and it was a real dose of reality for me.
Yeah.
And I have her to thank for in that sense of grounding me, because it did give me a sense of what the real world in that sense looked like. Because you come from a very different, from the UK into a New Zealand public school, but also I spoke with a thick Scottish accent. I did. I've completely lost it over the years. But a lot of my teachers and before friends, were all sort of looking at me and listening to me going, what is that? Where is she from? And how does this all work? So that was a real test for me as well. And I remember going home in tears.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Yep. It comes on occasionally when I'm really had a few drinks on. But yeah. But it's so that was a real. I think it was also a moment for me to kind of go, wow, like New Zealand is really different. But at 14, you don't know what you don't know. And so you still sort of, I think we're still figuring things out as we go through life. But it was just a moment of reality. And I went to Glendowie College, and at the time it was a Decile 4, so it was there was lots of them and us in that sense. And so, and what you had and what you didn't have. And so, to this day, I'm eternally grateful for that experience.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Probably a really nice lead on, and I've had some insight into this, but talk a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing in terms of just how formative they've been for you, and particularly in terms of the role your parents played and still play.
Yeah, no, thank you, Liz. I feel very blessed in that sense, and quite privileged to have parents that were and still are very much active in my life. I think I said to you, Liz, when I first met you, Dad and Mum and Dad both actually, when I turned 16, and this was the same for my sister, he sat me down and he said, look, I want to be your friend. Don't see me as a parent. Let's just be friends. Let's just talk about things. Let's debate things. Let's have those open, honest conversations. And I think that was the most critical turning point for me to kind of go back and think, wow, that was such a powerful moment. Because you suddenly remove those barriers and you genuinely have a seat at the table, don't you?
Do you think he was brought up like this? Where did he get that from?
I don't know. Great question, Matt.
Steal that?
No, do. Yeah. And I've got a lot of friends who steal that, and have told my dad even at dinners and lunches, going, Guy, we just love you for that bit of advice. Because I think that would be what I'd love to do when I'm a parent, is to shift that gear, I think. So hugely formative, Liz. And I think a part of me loves what we do with ICE in terms of supporting young people, because we're not all privileged and blessed to have those options and people around us. And the more I see, some parts of New Zealand or some parts of the world, there is a growing barrier and a growing difference between adults and parents and young kids who have expectations and probably are more informed than we are anyway, that have a view on things that we're not listening to. And so I think that formative piece is just I think it's a make or break. I really do. And I genuinely feel like what I've been doing for the last decade and my sort of journey has been around how can we listen more and how can we give more by listening, but let's just do some more outcome-based things. For me, it was very much about education and jobs.
You're quite a responsible young adult. I've heard some of your stories where you said to your boss, the one that comes up in lots of your interviews, said to your boss, they said, what job would you like? I'd like your job, actually. Yeah, and the CEO of a big company. I love that. But obviously quite focused and determined as well. And I'm sure your dad, in saying, hey, let's be friends, probably saw that in you and saw that maturity in you, which is interesting.
I think he did, but I also think, I think it was very much we have this societal construct between parents or adults and managers and people leaders and CEOs and your staff or your teams. And we use different jargon as we go along, right? From talent to teams to, part of the whānau to whatever it might be today, and it just kind of keeps evolving. But what does it actually mean?
Yeah.
And if you break it down, I actually genuinely do think it is about having brave conversations and knowing you're not going to get judged for it, and you're not going to get, reprimanded for it either. But you just got to have that dialogue. I was, in some sense, lucky, because if I reflect on that story, I did. My senior manager asked me when I was a graduate, where did I see myself in that business? And I said I wanted to be the CEO. I thought, why would you even ask me that question? It was like, really? And she just looked at me and thought, typical Generation Y. But she did love the fact that I was bold enough to say that. So she introduced me to the CEO, which was how I told him to his face that I wanted his job. Yeah. And to this day, he's my mentor. To this day, he's one of our family friends now. And he just loves the fact that I did have that conversation. And his words to me were, well, if you don't ask, you don't get, but you also don't know. And I think in businesses today, we talk about diversity, inclusivity, connectivity. Well, the conversation's got to happen both ways. And if it does happen both ways, you've got to be brave enough, I think, as a business today, to actually genuinely listen and then action it.
Yeah. And not be dismissive. It would have been easy for him to have said, oh, he's a young grad and, Gen Y and she's got aspirations. Isn't that cute? Totally. And been somewhat dismissive of it, as opposed to saying, well, that's bold. So
it could have gone both ways, right? It could have gone either way. That would have been the end of my career.
And I'm not attributing that to because it was a guy. I mean, women can be equally as dismissive. So
absolutely.
Do you think we've come a long way over the last 10, 15, 20 years? I mean, there is no way in hell I would have said, I want to have your job, but if one of my team members says it to me, I have huge respect for it, and I can see the transition, because back in my day there was no way I would have said it, but I get it quite a bit now, and I'm like, bring it on. So is that transition happening?
I think we have probably, Mel, but possibly in more sectors than others, I would think. I think there's still some very traditional verticals and sectors and very traditional methods of operating, probably based on just company size or structure, and that I guess is the challenge, but I think therein lies the opportunity.
Another question, is it a Kiwi thing? being quite sort of stuck in the mud?
No.
Or is it happening?
I think it's
internationally.
I think it's international. I think we're in some sense. Sometimes I feel like we've got it slightly better here. In some things, possibly because we're small enough and malleable enough. I'm only referring to mostly some of my work in Asia. Parts of Asia are just still so behind the curve. You've just got to almost reframe your mindset when you turn up to those meetings or in front of those, individuals, and go, you're dealing with what you've got in front of you, so we've just got to know how to duck and dive in this situation.
And I think it's something you said earlier around constructs and traditional constructs, and when you get out of New Zealand, particularly into some of the Asian countries, the cultural constructs around respect. It's not disrespectful these days to say to somebody superior that you want their job if it's said in a respectful way, but sometimes that's the way it's interpreted on cheeky, Or, do you know how hard I've worked to get to this? It's those constructs that I think we're starting to see shift, which is what you've said before.
Yes, and I think culture constructs are still very invisible though, and it's hard to describe, and I think it's deeply personal, and I think it's very hard to measure, and that's what I would say, Mel, is we're still on that journey. Sure. And I think we will be. But we've got to all know that we are on that together, and then that there needs to be a shift or a movement.
That's interesting. To give us a bit of context behind your career journey, could you highlight a mountaintop moment for you, and then on the other side, a deep valley challenge through your career and business journey?
I think a mountaintop for me was when I was able to successfully export a services business offshore. I remember getting told quite early on in New Zealand that you can't really export a services business because it's hard. It's you that's selling it. It's personal brand. There were so many things I got told in my early 20s, and I just remember thinking, you've just given me the why as to why I can do this and I need to do this and I should do this. And so that was my mountaintop, setting up in Singapore, which kind of helped leverage businesses across APAC. but mostly back to New Zealand, which was the irony. And so that was a real moment for me. I think the biggest moment coming in from you sort of see this right through, because you've got highs and lows with life and business, right? And they're always intertwined. I think a low for me was always, and still is sometimes, is knowing that you're on your own and the buck stops with you, no matter how good your team is or how amazing your board is. And I think those were learnings for me, because you don't get taught that. You can get told it, but you don't know what you don't know in terms of experience till you're actually feeling it. And I just still recall when I landed in China and my bags hadn't arrived, and I had this massive pitch that evening, and I literally just sat on the ground at the airport, and everything was just, Mandarin, Cantonese, and I'm just sitting there going, I don't even know what I'm doing here, and I'm on my bloody own. I've got my laptop, I've got a hand luggage which has got some stuff in it. You learn to pack really well, so that in case your bags don't arrive, you've still got an outfit you can put on. So that was all covered, but I just sat there on the ground and I watched everybody just go past me, and it felt like I was in a movie. And I just remember thinking, and I'd split my nail, so I was bleeding, and I was sitting there going, this is just not okay. I'm sweating because it's hot. It's just everything's just not New Zealand, and it's dirty. And this is, I'm in my late 20s, and it's all very new. Like you can read about this stuff, but experiencing it's quite different. And I just sat there and I thought, what am I doing? And I just burst into tears. I literally did. And I think it was a low moment, but at the same time, I think it was that reality of, well, everyone else is backing you, Nuwanthie, so you've got to back yourself here. And that was literally like half an hour of that, and then I got up and thought, right, I've just got to just move on, make a note to the airport that this is where I'm staying, and get my bag sent if you can within the week. And away I went with my hand luggage.
Where does that strength come from? As a 20-year-old, where does that come from?
I don't know now. It's really, I don't know. I think being born into, a Sri Lankan family, and my parents didn't have very much. They worked for every dollar they've got today. I think you learn that hard work does get you places. It's the how. And it's also then you learn over the years that it's not just about hard work, it's about how you leverage your hard work, right? But you learn that again as you go. But I think that innate thirst or hunger, I think, has always been there. I will also say I used to be a ballet dancer, so I danced for 17 years and competed, and you gain a sense of resilience as a dancer that I always say to, my friends, best friends who are all mums, get your daughters to do some form of dance or something that's outside your normal kind of day-to-day, because you do learn something from a mindset perspective to just keep going. And I just recall, your toes are bleeding, but you bandage it up and stick it into your toe shoes, and then you're on stage and no one knows anything less. And you're performing. And so I think there is I draw on that parallel. I think there's a resilience there that does build up, and I was grateful to have that through my journey.
I feel like maybe you need to take a minute and just talk about the business.
Yes.
I know it.
The words right out of my
spoken about it, but maybe share a little bit about what the business is and
So I'll take a step back for a second and say that it started because as a grad I entered the workforce. I was in the health sector, and I realised that there was this massive gap in the market to help young people not only understand what brands are and what they do and how they deliver and make impact, but also for organisations to realise how they could support young people coming through. So you're not just hiring on volume, or you're not just hiring for the sake of doing it because it's a tick-the-box exercise, but it's more so a strategic skills and capability build model. And it hit me as a grad when I was going through my own grad program. And because I asked my CEO at the time that I wanted his job, I immediately excelled within my graduate cohort. So within 18 months, I was reporting to him, working on projects that he basically just gave me. He created this position for me, which is the Special Projects Coordinator, and I was essentially the person that just got shit done in the business. And so I was 21, 22, and I was dealing with teams and people that were way older, and I realised the dynamics were just so different based on who you are, what your position is in the organisation structure, and who was supporting you in terms of your allies and your sponsors. And then I realised, actually, as a grad, it's a really lonely space. But also, from a people leader perspective on the other side, sometimes you genuinely don't know how to help navigate these graduates or interns or anyone coming through the pipeline to make sure that you're building their skills, not just giving them a job. Because I also think from a generational perspective, there's a real purpose-driven piece there, and I think the younger ones, even today, the Generation Alphas coming out today, are even more purpose-driven than even the Generation Y or the Zoomers were. So, you know, there's a lot for organisations to unpack, but there's a lot for them to also do, otherwise you are going to trigger attrition issues going forward. So the business model essentially is working with organisations, ensuring that their strategy to attract the early career strategy is the right strategy, that it's evolving, and once it's been set, that they're actually delivering what they're saying. So it's not just a piece of paper sitting in a board pack, but more so that they're translating it every day. And if you're a global organisation, how do you actually unpack that across different markets? Because you still have the same brand, but you've got a very different storyline per country. And that was partly why I went offshore, because I felt that we had to manage the footprint of a brand, but also the local nuances and support even the opportunity. Because at the time when I was, you know, as a grad growing up, this whole OE thing was such a big deal. You know, all my friends went offshore and did things, like whether it was waitressing or whatever it was. And when they came back to not very much. And so in my mind, it was like, well, how do we actually set talent mobility but make it actually a viable, structured program? And that's a huge part of what we do with our clients.
When you say they came back to New Zealand and not too much, what do you mean by that?
The recession had hit.
Yeah.
So it was like just after the first GFC, well, between 08, 09, 010. And organisations were not hiring anyone without the experience.
Okay.
So you'd gone offshore, you'd done stuff, you'd come back, but it wasn't enough, or it wasn't New Zealand experience, but you were degree qualified, right? And whereas I made the punt to stay on, and because I'd kind of progressed by asking, you know, they were starting on, it was 40 grand at the time, and I was in leaps and bounds, and I couldn't understand the disparity. Like, I genuinely didn't understand it.
I'm going to put it out there. I think it's still happening. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole New Zealand.
Yeah. It happened to me. It was a long time. It was probably 10 or so years ago, 10, 15 years ago. But I feel like it's still happening.
It's just,
That just a little bit of that closed-mindedness.
Yeah.
You don't have New Zealand experience. But what? I've got all this experience from overseas.
Yeah. But that's linked to that whole tall poppy thing that we just haven't acknowledged, or we've got a lot to do.
We do. And that is the purpose of this podcast.
I kind of want to I'm skipping a bit, but we'll go back, but I kind of want to dive a little bit into the why behind that and some of the learnings from overseas. Where did I find it? Yeah, you obviously left a real mark with that mentor or that manager, the CEO that you had. What can the next generation do from your perspective to connect with their managers, to leave that mark, and to have that really great career progression?
That's a great question. I think the important thing is to first find your place. I think a lot of young people, we go through this whole phase of, you know, you want a job, you qualify, and then you want to be sort of an activist in an organisation, or you want to stand for something, and that's really important that you do, but you've got to find your own place. And I think from what I know and what I see every day, businesses also want to know that you are pretty confident to back yourself. And sometimes what we see a lot of is it's a lot of conversation one way, or it's a lot of demands one way, but it doesn't work that way. So there's an element there where my advice would be, ask those questions, be bold, but know your place in the sense of knowing who you are and what you know you can absolutely do. Now, I'm not saying you will always know what you can do, but then don't be afraid to ask. There is a real generational shift at the moment where, you know, younger grads and interns even today are just, they don't want to ask. And that's a big issue. Because if you don't ask, and if you're not going to put your hand up and say, I don't actually know this, I don't know about this, I'm not sure about this, help me out, that's not failure. That's not saying to someone that you're not good enough, or you're not smart enough, or you're not right for the job. It's actually about you acknowledging the fact that you're being more self-aware. And that's what people leaders are looking for, in that sense of, let's not waste time working through something that you're not sure of, but ask, and let's support you on that journey. But on the other side of it, I think it's about leaders and businesses and organisations being willing to sit down and say, not just are you okay, but do you know the how here? Yeah. Can we, what do we need to set up around you, whether it's coaching, whether it's mentoring, and we use those words interchangeably, but they're genuinely quite different. And they serve very different purposes. And so for me, it's very much picking up what the person in front of you is really wanting and needing, and how you could develop them based on their own passion and their own willingness to learn. Yeah.
That point you said around our youth or the next generation coming up and not wanting to ask, do you think that comes from like a New Zealand tall poppy thing? Is it something that when you moved to Singapore you saw in the youth there, or is it more a Kiwi thing?
I think it's more a Kiwi thing. In Singapore and parts of Asia, you get told. So you ask, but you're basically told. So it's very kind of, but because you're told, you succeed quite quickly, because it's the recipe is generally pretty well constructed. So you kind of, you fast forward things. Whereas in New Zealand, you kind of learn by doing as well, which is really awesome. And I think that's quite unique, and it's something we should actually drive and harness more personally. But it's making sure that they have the opportunity to learn by doing, because as soon as they make mistakes, we're very quick to say, well, you've just stuffed that up, haven't you?
Right.
And we still have those conversations, and it's like, well, how do you reframe that and say, well, actually, learn by doing, how can we support you now to not, to learn from that experience and grow from there?
That's really interesting. What do you think the next generation need the most from our business leaders and managers to succeed?
For me, and from I guess from what I'm seeing, it's being everything to that person. And it sounds really like, what do you mean by that? You can be their leader, their manager, their supporter, their cheerleader, their counsellor, their best friend, sometimes their mum, and it all happens sometimes in one day. And I do think that the more individuals and people leaders who genuinely have that level of insight, or that level of the ability to relate like that in a holistic manner, because young people do bring themselves, they bring their whole selves, and whether we like it or not, there are days when you get told things that you're like, I genuinely didn't want to know that. Really? Okay. Right. So how do you kind of reframe that? Because it's like, not even 3 years ago we were having those open conversations around the table. So you've just shared that with me. Okay, so how, what's the how piece? And I think we're still figuring that out, I think, and you grow as a people leader to be able to do that. But I do think that when we say to people, and anyone for that matter, bring your whole self to work, well, you've got to be ready for it.
And you have to be prepared to not deprioritize certain aspects of that to prioritize other things.
Yes.
It's just, and I know it's not easy, because like you said, there are days when you just go, really?
As a leader, how do you build the know-how to be all of those things, and the strength as well? Because there is a lot of strength that you need to be the mentor and the mum and the leader and the technical person. It's a lot to bear.
I always akin it to, Mel, being able to have those off-the-field conversations, because sometimes it's actually not about sitting in the office or in the room or around the table, and I feel like that strength when you're doing that off the field is a lot more natural, because I think as a leader you also you're in a different place in space, and it's actually a physical adjustment, but it's a huge mindset adjustment. So that's how I was supported growing up, and I was very privileged and lucky, I feel, to have incredible managers when I was in my programs myself. So I saw all of that, but you also learn what you don't want to do really quickly, and what you don't want to be when you grow up in that sense. But that strength piece let's not pull roses over it. It's exhausting, absolutely. And I think that's also a question I know the team, the CEO and the team always challenge our own businesses and clients and say, are you ready for that? Like, can you actually really deal with that? Because it is exhausting, and you've got to still be able to keep up. And there's a level of pace in there.
Exhausting yet rewarding.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It's really interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump back up now. But thanks for letting me deep dive in that moment. What does a seat at the table mean to you? And have you ever felt like you didn't have a seat at the table? With that in mind, how does it affect the way that you lead?
I think my view on the world has always been that if you don't have a seat at the table, just drag your own seat.
I love that.
Literally. Drag it to the table. Right? And that's, I guess, just who I am, but I think it's also just how I've ended up doing a myriad of different things in my life and career. Because you will still find, and I still find, that you don't have a seat at the table, not at every table. And even if you do, it's not a very honest seat. And so you're always missing something, and you always feel like you're on the back foot because you're at the table because you tick a box, or you're there because you're there.
How do you know? How do you know it's not honest?
Sometimes I've got told that to my face.
Okay.
So you just have to sit back and go, is this a good thing in terms of, does this align with my values?
Do you walk out the door, or do you?
I do normally.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I do normally. Sometimes I don't.
Okay.
Because it's quite nice to challenge that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because you can't, if you walk out, there is more of that that's going to keep happening, right?
So true.
You're almost reinforcing it
You are.
in your exit.
So there are times I don't, but I do pick my battles based on what I feel I can deal with, and if I've got the mental strength that week or for that year, or what my life looks like in that sense. But no, I get told that. You also I think when it's debates or discussions or conversations, you just know when you're not really heard. And sometimes I think, and I've said this to others, that's okay as long as you know then how to support and maneuver your voice at the right time. You've got to pick your times. And you just, I've just had to learn to do that. I forget that I tick a few boxes in that sense most of the time. I actually genuinely do. And I've had people say things like, I know, oh, you speak really good English, because they see my name and they go, oh my God. I mean, I'd hate to be a grad today in that sense of applying for jobs, because people would, I know, look at that and go, that name's just so super long, and can she speak English? And I've had people ring me and go, oh, you speak English, and I'm just like, who says that? But and then my response is, you sort of learn as you go, but I sort of go, well, so do you, but it kind of works both ways, But hey, English is a really hard language, I think, to master. From grammar to pronunciation to I've got my bad days.
Well, we've moved on from that. Aren't we in 2023?
I know, right?
But it's acknowledging that though, Mel, and I think, and it's not something I always say to people, it's not something you want to keep pulling back and pulling in to the dialogue, but it's something you've got to recognise that there's a level of culture or conversation that is genuinely hidden.
I wanted to ask another question. How did you get the confidence to drag the seat to the table? Or how do you get that confidence?
I think for me, it's always been, Mel, if you tell me that you can't do something, I just sort of look at you and go, really? Really?
Bring it on!
Why can't I do something? I mean, for instance, I got told I couldn't export my business, right? And good luck with the services business at the age of 23, 24. And it can go two ways, right? It can either be okay, that's not for me, and this is going to be little me, and I'm told I can't do this, or you've got the option of going, yeah, I can, I'm going to prove you wrong. So for me, it's been that innate fighter or that fighter in me, I think it's always been there. It can get me into trouble sometimes. So I've got to, and you learn as you get older, I think, that you've just got to, everything's in moderation, but it just depends on what battle you want to pick in that sense to that point as well. But if you don't pick it, well, you're not going to move forward, are you? And I think a seat at the table for me has always been that if you feel your values are aligned, if you feel, for me, you're going to make impact, whether it's on my boards, whether it's what I do, that's great. That I think is almost half of it or more. Everything else, you've almost got the strength to then deal with and navigate. But it's claiming that seat.
And it's that ability in the moment, isn't it, to knowing whether pulling your seat up to the table is going to have an impact on that table or on you in some positive way.
Yeah.
And if the answer to that question or those questions is no and no, then don't pull it up.
Don't pull it up. Exactly. Yeah.
But that's not always easy. That's a skill and a knack to be able to assess that. And I'm sure there's times you pulled the table up and gone, I wished I didn't.
Totally.
Because I've made no difference and it's made no difference to me.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have something? Okay. With your success, have you ever felt sort of cut down by tall poppy in New Zealand? Like people sort of not being able to handle the success that you've had at a young age or the confidence that you bring at a board?
I will say one of my favourite quotes is actually that success is misleading, but failure is very honest. And so if you learn to fail, grow and learn, no matter how tough it is around you, it will always, I believe, ground you, and it is something that grounds me.
Awesome.
I think people struggle when you're younger and you've got confidence because you're then deemed as cocky. Right?
Yeah.
And as a woman, I think as well, if you know what you want and you know exactly what you want to say and position it out there, you're far more, unfortunately, still, I believe, judged for it. I'd like to think we're not there anymore, but I think the reality is we're still there, and I think that's going to be something that we could perhaps collectively look at in the future, because I think there's a huge opportunity there that I also feel we should be driving for that future of this country and the future for both men and women and communities, full stop. Does that kind of
Yeah, it does. How do you deal with that feeling when you're in a meeting or you're on a, because I know you're a director of boards, when you're feeling like, I think this person is getting maybe intimidated by your success, how do you deal and push through that?
It's actually the reverse sometimes. It's so for most of the work I do and most of the boards I'm on, pretty much all of them, bar maybe a few, they're incredible people.
Yeah.
And I feel genuinely humbled to be around them, and you learn from them, and you learn from skilled leaders and board directors by, I think, understanding, observing, and saying very little. So I can be the quietest person around the table, which might surprise you at times, because I do want to learn, and that's always been who I am, and I will tell my board, other trustees or directors or chairs, I'm here to learn.
That's great.
And I'm going to take that position straight up. So they know that, and that the expectations are set.
Awesome.
But there are certainly times when by not saying something, it's actually, you're disadvantaging the whole group and the whole organisation. So by being open and honest and saying something or positioning what your point is important. But at the same time, if you're not heard, I think it's more the reverse of, it's not about tall poppy, it's almost that you're still inexperienced, therefore, ...
Right, yeah.
And you've got to know how to take that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's interesting.
Curious question for me is, what do people misunderstand about you most?
Yeah, it's a really good one, Liz. I love sparkly things. I love colour. I love my heels. I love my handbags. I love my brands. And his dad always said to me, if you can afford it, great, go for it. Right?
I really
Life's too short.
want
Should we do a lunch?
Awesome.
We can do a lunch post this. But it was also a great way of teaching me how to save, because he's like, if you can't afford something, don't buy it. Don't do it. But I do love sparkly, colourful things, and you get judged for it all the time. And you know, I would jokingly say, and this was my foray into politics, if you're a pretty face, or you know, there's all these things that you tick, and you suddenly just like, well, you must not be that clever or smart, or
you care about the wrong things.
yeah. So the biggest thing I think is, you can box me in quite quickly. And then I'm like, well, if you want to do that, that's your problem, not mine to own. But that's also great, because you're at a bit of an advantage, because you're completely misread for a lot of it.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
I like that bit of mystery there. It's cool to be misread.
I don't mind. I really don't.
Yeah, I like it. It's the confidence to be like, this is who I am. So take it or leave it. Which you would have had to have a lot of when you went into politics, I'm sure. Can we unpack that time for a little bit? How did that all happen, and what did it teach you as well around communities, people, and that policy piece?
How was I got involved locally in getting rid of illegal brothels.
Wow.
Residential illegal brothels. And so I ended up working with local government and central government to try and understand what the policies were and why we were passing legislation at a national level, at a country level, central level, that wasn't actually about building Auckland or creating a more, because it was the whole idea was the whole livable city thing, right? And so, no judgment anyway, but for me it was very much a, tell me more about the why here. And no one could help unpack that. And then I realised quite quickly that in order for policy to work, it's got to be a real grassroots piece, and information's got to flow both ways. So I got involved in that just by coincidence, because I literally, across the road from my parents' family home, there was residential illegal brothels that were set up. And it was a huge disadvantage to the local schools, and the whole community was just like, can someone help?
Wow.
And there was no one. I was 18. So I was just like,
wow.
Okay, well everyone's complaining, no one's doing anything, I'm just gonna unpack this, because I didn't know what I didn't know. So I learned really quickly about legislation, policy, communities, businesses, public-private sector. It was all just like, oh, whoa. It's also who you know in New Zealand, and so I was successful in moving those illegal brothels into proper areas that were more ring-fenced for the safety of the woman, because that was the biggest issue that we were having, actually, and for the local schools, as I said. So that was kind of how I got into it, because all my local MPs across all parties were like, who are you? This is amazing that you're doing this, and you're having these really crazy dialogues and conversations, and I'm going, well, someone's got to do this, because no one's doing anything about it. And it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's just we need more structure to this. So that was my kind of in. And then for me, I'm genuinely very centre and very liberal and a real greenie as well. But I stood for the National Party, partly because I am so pro-business and I'm so pro-private sector. And I know from having, again, built my own business, exported my own business, without policy, there's not much the private sector can do either. So a really good combination between public and private, and the policy piece is such an important construct. And I was A, curious, but B, I felt like I've got something to contribute, which is why I stood. So it was an eye-opener.
Yeah.
You, in terms of that journey, you sort of alluded to it a bit. You run for public office, and it genuinely is public. You can't have a cup of tea or breakfast with your family or your friends, because you get reporters or you get people, even as a candidate, asking you a million things, even on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. Or you learn so much about that experience of being exposed. But at the same time, what I learnt was how hard-working, regardless of party, colour or team jersey that you wear, that politics really is on a person and on their family. It is relentless. I thought setting up a business and knocking on doors, working basically crazy hours was doable. but politics was a whole different ballgame. So regardless of jersey colour, regardless of how you vote, what I will say is they work tirelessly, and you've got to have a real reason for it, and everyone's got a different why, and that is also quite special.
Yeah.
Wow. How can the private sector get more involved?
Great question, Mel. I think it would be awesome to see more private sector people standing for Parliament, which is partly why I did it, because I do think there needs to be that interlink and a level of relevance, I think. But I also think government need to be way more active, and not just through associations or groups, but more active based on where we're going as a country. What do we really want to focus on, and how do we then tap into the right private sector groups to actually enable that? We are doing some of that. I mean, you think about tech, you think about export manufacturing. There is a lot of that, but it's sometimes a stop-start situation based on our cycles, really, as well.
Are we doing enough of it?
I always say we don't.
Yeah.
I always say that's just my measure on anything, really. We could always do a lot more. Or we should always strive to do a bit more. I think there's still a lot more we could be doing.
And my impression is that be doing more with intentionality, as opposed to just, with clarity around why we're doing it and what we hope to get by doing it. And
the interesting thing, though, Liz, with that is the why is there, but it gets really blurred when it comes to pitching it to the voter.
I agree.
Right? And so what I did learn as well is that in business, when you sell something, you deliver it. You're only as good as your last job.
Yeah, wow.
Whereas in politics, it doesn't sometimes matter.
Wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
But in business, we've got clarity around the vision for our business, and hopefully most successful businesses can articulate, if we're fantastically successful in 5 years, what will we have achieved? And I'm not sure that we have that as a country.
No,
Right.
No, we don't. And it's changing. It evolves all the time too, doesn't it? Based on who's in or who's out, or who speaks, which sector speaks the loudest as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're only now recognising that tech's, a 4% GDP contributor. Like, that took a while. I remember when I stood, I said to people, my portfolio would be chief digital. That would be, I'd love to lead that, because it cuts across any sector of business. And I remember people within Parliament, not within a party, but within Parliament, just going, what's that?
Wow.
And I was like, this is really interesting.
Can I just say, New Zealand needs you.
Yeah. Oh, so true. Please. You follow.
I think I've got my squad and my team here. Just putting it out there.
Definitely.
I'll back you up.
You're such an impact-led leader, and with that all in mind, what vehicle do you think is the best way to have most impact? Is it government, business, charity, social? Is there something that sticks out to you now on the other side of that?
I think so. I got into boards actually and went into governance because I learned so much about different policy and different sectors within different policy, and that was why I deliberately picked certain board portfolios going forward post my candidacy. I think in certain sectors, like let's take health for instance, driving it through charitable trusts and assets and value is the only way we could keep up with the demand from a supply demand, because we just don't have enough money for the public service, health service. If you think about infrastructure, it's a public-private partnership, so that's definitely policy and business and iwi at the table. If you think about, golly, give me another sector, the arts. It's another combination of genuine grassroots charity, but also government. So, and that's policy in that sense. So, it does cut across, and that's what I do love about the boards that I'm on, is and the world of governance, is it cuts across strategy, but it also cuts across the level of policy. but you are having to make impact, because some of these boards are more hands-on than others, but it's also bringing the right partnerships around the table.
Yeah.
And to do that, it's communities.
That makes a lot of sense, that it can differ from sector to sector in terms of what are the vehicle sort of partnerships that need to come together to make it successful. Yeah. Wow.
I'd love to know, a funny question, because you're still so young in my eyes, but what advice would you give your younger self?
I've often thought about this, and I think the biggest one is around rallying the right people around you. Because sometimes when you're young and you go through phases, whether it's your business and life, people pick you, and you fail to stop and pause because you're just going through the motions of getting things done. And I think the advice I'd give is take a moment and actually pick your team.
Nice, I love that.
That's really good
It
advice.
is so true. As a young person, you do get picked, and you just go with the flow. Very wise, very wise.
And people that sometimes pick you are people that want to pick winners, or pick people that they feel they want to have in their lives or in their spheres. But
They can mould or manipulate.
Yes, but it's not necessarily you, or it's not aligned with who you are. And it's okay to be like, actually, this is not my space.
Interesting.
What does success look like for you, or what, when you look at your next 5 years, or how many years you want to put it, what does that look like for you? What's your next steps?
Great question. I've done a lot in my business and life world, or my career world. I do want to spend a bit of time in my life doing my life stuff.
Cool.
I haven't prioritised that as much as I would have, so I want to give myself the next few years to just actually have a business plan for my own life, my own personal goals that I've sometimes put aside, or you sort of just you always sort of think as a woman as well, it'll all happen, it's all good, we'll get to that point. But then you sort of suddenly wake up and you go, actually you've got to be intentional about it, like you have with everything else in your life. So I think for me the next few years is just taking stock of everything and just consolidating and being okay with that. And it's been a great space for me at the moment, going through that at the moment, knowing full well that there's a few other things I want to conquer after that, but it's just like pacing it intentionally. Yeah,
that's very cool. I love that answer. And yeah, I think it's really cool to be able to take, like, to be running fast and to be having such great impact, but then also to slow down and go, hey, what do I want for my life? And let's rethink this, and let's think, what do I need as a personal leader as well at some point.
And not feel selfish in doing that.
Yes.
Not think that would be a luxury, but
And I think for a lot of that, as we do, right, we do sort of take that role of, people backing you or people backing me, so I've got to keep the pace and just keep moving, and I've just had those conversations and gone, actually, no, I do want some time for me.
Yeah, that's really
And that's
good.
okay.
And it's an important message right now for lots of leaders and owners, because they prioritize everyone else's welfare over their own. And in the end, then all of a sudden it's like, well, I haven't looked after myself, and that means I'm not going to be able to look after anything or anyone else. So again, that's why I think we need to turn that sense of self, that's being a bit selfish or indulgent, on its head.
So true, because life's so short and we get to the end of it,
short,
and we want to be really proud of taking time for us and doing things for others too. So I love that answer. We're at an hour mark, and I feel like we need a part 2, because seriously, I'm like, there's so much
We
more.
haven't solved all the problems.
I vote for part 2.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask? Otherwise, we'll
Maybe
ask
that last question.
Yeah.
So you go for it.
Okay, I love this last question. Who is one person you would like to thank, someone that has been influential in your journey?
I think I've talked about him a bit.
I'm glad he's coming up again.
Catch up. Definitely my dad. I think, as a young person, I wanted to do med, didn't end up doing it because I decided I didn't want to be a doctor and study for like 15 years of my life. Went home and told them that Mum just about died. Dad said, great, at least you now know. That was the start. And then I quit my job because my then boss said I should start my own business. Went home, moved back home, and I said to Dad, I'm going to start my own business. No one was going to give me any seed capital because it is a services business, and I was only 23, 24. He put money in my business bank account and said, there you go, it's $60,000 to help you get moving. Just little things like that I think were always a leg up, which was amazing, and I would like to put that forward in the future myself. So.
What an amazing human.
Yeah, very inspiring. Cool. And left a legacy that has now been lived through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool.
Look what it's done.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
that was
you.
so inspiring.
So lovely to catch up with you all, and really, really enjoyed this conversation.
If you haven't already, check out Season 1 to hear similar business and leadership stories empowering diversity and community. See you next month.